Good.
Today, introducing
The four-way test.
oh the four-way test.
But I remember I went,
That's
there
what
were
I
all
meant.
sorts of empty boxes. I know I filled in one of them. Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Cary Rotary Club. I hope you're having a joyful summer solstice, first day of summer. It's a gorgeous afternoon. Also, 58 years plus 3 to the Cary Rotary Club. So we'll celebrate that one again. Okay. 3 days. 58 years and 3 days as a club. John Hatcher, can I ask you to lead us, please, in the prayer and the pledge?
Our heads, please. Our Father and our God, we're thankful for this day and the great blessings that we share today and every day. Especially thankful for Rotary and what it means to each of us and to other people around the world. Lord, be with this country and all that is happening, good and bad. Guide us as individuals and as residents. These things we ask in your holy name. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. God bless America, land that I love, stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans wonderful. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Thank you, Past District Governor John. Appreciate that. Paul Wasilkevich,
Yes.
can you help us welcome guests and visiting Rotarians?
I'd be proud of you. I'd be proud of you. We have a very special guest, and I will let John Rigsby introduce her because he seems to know a little bit more about her.
Thank you, Paul, and President Bob, and fellow Rotarians, I'm happy to have with me today my wife of almost 46 years now, Paula.
Welcome, Paula. Thank you, John, for bringing Paul. That's it. And I also want to recognize Drew and Tony back with us after time. So fantastic to have you both. No, they're not guests. Yes. But haven't seen you for a little bit, so we're thrilled to have you back with us. A couple of reminders just around club business and service projects. Thank you for those that have brought in some snacks for the district Snacks for Students program that will be part of our service project at the district level installation next week. Rod tells me that if you wanted to bring, if you missed the opportunity and wanted to bring some more of those individually wrapped snacks to our banquet next Tuesday, he can transport them next Wednesday. But thank you for those that have brought that. Also upcoming in July is a Rotary Readers opportunity with Read to Achieve. We've talked about this the last couple of meetings. An opportunity to read with elementary school students in and around our area, 7 targeted schools. It does require registration with Wake County Public School System. So if you have any questions about that process, see Camille, myself, Bill, when you have an opportunity. But it's a great chance for us to get back into the schools, which we haven't really been able to do for 2 or 3 years. Speaking of the club awards and installation banquet, it's next Tuesday. It's not too late to RSVP. Renee has a fantastic experience planned for us. We'll have a social starting at 6 o'clock, dinner shortly after 7. And if Rod and I have anything to do with it, you'll get out of there by 9. So it's good. Actually, we've got a great opportunity to share some just fellowship and social time. But we've also got a good program. You might have gotten a bit of a cryptic email from Tim Mannix this week mentioning some special recognition that we're going to get as a club related to Paul Harris Fellowship. And so I've got a couple of requests about that. Number one, our district governor, Angela Jameson, will be with us to help us celebrate that achievement, as will Pat Gallagher, our area governor. But for those in the club that are Paul Harris Fellows, I'll encourage you to wear your pin, your medallion, if you have one. So it's a chance to dig through some of your old mementos. And what we're looking to do is really more actively recognize how supportive this club has been to the Paul Harris Fellow and the Rotary Foundation. And by recognizing it, by wearing these items as part of our meetings 2 or 3 times a year. And so this installation banquet is a great time to do that. So if you don't have a medallion, if you don't know what I'm talking about, let me know and we'll talk about it. We'll get you one. But if you have, wear your Paul Harris pin. I know everybody that's a Paul Harris Fellow has a Paul Harris pin. Great. I also wanted to share just a couple of some correspondence that we've received recently. You may recall that Sally Shaver had some surgery recently. She's doing great, but she sends this note. Thanks so much for remembering me with fruit arrangement and card after my recent knee surgery. It made me feel good to know that you were thinking of me and wishing me a speedy recovery. I'm well on the way to recovery, trying to be patient and looking forward to when I can join our meetings in person. Thanks again from Sally. So appreciation from Sally will be great when she's able to join us. Neil Lagarde also received a note from Charlie Hatch, who is key in helping to organize the Boys and Girls Home Golf Tournament. Thank you for your help with golf on Monday a week. Our children are better today because of your efforts. Thank you, teams, for me. So thank you, Neil, for leading us through that. Oh, I saw him. There you are. And thanks for sharing this note from Charlie. So with that, Any miracle moments that we would like to share? Either in our room or online, kind of wave if you have something online you want to share. Paul?
Thank you. Our family's still in Ukraine, but we got to Detroit, Michigan last week. So 2 are out. I got 5 more left. They kind of don't want to go. They're trying not to be noticed, not to be shot. So, but we're grateful for the 2 that made it to Detroit, Michigan last week.
Fantastic. Good luck. Neil?
My miracle is actually 2-part. One, my daughter on the 13th, she closed on the new house, first time homeowner. And the real miracle is that tomorrow or Thursday, she has movers moving her, so dad does not have to do it this time.
Wow, that's worthy of celebration. Any others? Terrific. Well, then, if I can, let me ask Paul Sauceman to introduce our program today. Paul.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure for me to introduce one of our own members. Mr. Paul Carr is our speaker today. Paul's a retired captain with Delta Airlines and a colonel in the United States Air Force with over 40 years of aviation experience. Quite an achievement. He has a lifelong interest in the Wright brothers and will appear today as Wilbur Wright, and he's done this since 2002. Appearing as Wilbur Wright, he describes how his family grew up in Dayton, Ohio, and forged the path for the Wright brothers' historical achievements. Paul does not charge for his visits and speaking today, but he is also an active member of the Miracle League of the Triangle. And Tony and Paul together are very active in this organization. So I'd encourage you to make a donation to the Miracle League for his presentation today. If you have any questions, please see Paul or Tony. I'm sure they'll help you do that. So without further ado, Paul Carr is Wilbur Wright.
Good afternoon, my friends. I am Wilbur Wright, the inventor, along with my brother Orville, of the first heavier-than-air, controllable, powered flying machine. I lived a long time ago. My spirit has been called back to the present to tell the story one more time. Why did I pick Kitty Hawk, North Carolina as the spot for this miracle? What was my life like growing up in Dayton, Ohio? And how did it all begin? As best I can remember, it started when I was a very small boy. My father had a book in his library about ornithology, the study of birds, and I would look at it for hours. It's my favorite book, and it's my earliest recollection of this fascination that I had with things that flew, a fascination that stayed with me for my entire life. But long before I came along, long before my brother Orville, it's not going here. I'll keep talking though. Long before I came along, or my brother and Orville, in fact, as long as there had been people, they would dream about flying because flying is exciting and magical and romantic. And since they had never done it, they would make up stories, or they would draw pictures, or they would create legends about people who flew. One of the earliest was written about Daedalus and Icarus, 2 men trapped on an island in the Mediterranean Sea. To try to escape, Daedalus fashioned wings made from bird feathers and string and wax, and he warned Icarus not to fly too high. But Icarus became arrogant because he could fly and none of the other people could. He forgot what his father said. He zoomed up too high and his wings melted and he crashed into the sea. In 1492, Leonardo da Vinci drew pictures of flying machines. Even Leonardo dreamed about flying. Right here in North Carolina, around the year 1700 in Bertie County, there was a Native American referred to as the Great Conjurer. And it was said that the Great Conjurer would stand on the banks of the Salmon River, and he had a magic stick, like a magic wand. And he would speak an incantation, and he would wave the stick in the air 3 times. And then he would be levitated and lifted and transported across the Salmon River as if he were flying. I don't know if that story is true or not, but he was a real individual that lived in Bertie County. But the point is, even the Native Americans dreamed about flying, and so did I. My father was Bishop Milton Wright of the United Church of the Brethren. My mother was Susan Corner Wright. I had 2 older brothers, Rushlin and Lauren. Then there was me, my brother Orville, and our little sister, Catherine. We called her Sturchins. That was the German word for sister. And we all went to public schools. But my parents, particularly my father, believed that the education one received at home was just as important, perhaps even more important than the one you received at school. And to that end, he filled our house here at number 7 Hawthorne Street with books. We had 2 libraries. The one downstairs is where we shared all our books in common. The one upstairs is where he kept all of the books he used in his work with the church. And by the time I was 12 years old, I had read all the books in our house. I became an excellent reader. Not only reading, he wanted to make sure that we learned to communicate well. And when he would travel as an itinerant minister, he would write letters to us and tell us about the places that he visited, the people that he met, the weather, the geography, even the food that he ate. You see, he used his letters to us as a way of helping with our education. And he encouraged us to write and tell about the things that we were doing. This is a letter my brother wrote to him in 1881. Dear Father, I got your letter today. My teacher said I was a good boy. We have 45 in our room. The other day, I took a machine can and filled it with water. Then I put it on the stove and waited a little while, and the water came squirting out of the top about 1 foot. The old cat is dead. Love, Orville. So we learned to read well. We learned to write well. Even the toys that my father would bring home to us were a way of sparking our curiosity and our interest. When I was 11 years old, he brought home this little small flying toy. It was a Panard helicopter. We nicknamed it the Bat. He told me to hold out my hands. He was going to toss it to me. But when he let it go, it took off into the sky, crashed into the ceiling and all around the walls. And I was fascinated by that toy, the most fascinating thing that I had ever seen. Well, Orville and I took it and we tried to improve on it and make bigger models of it. But the memory of that little toy I received at age 11 stayed with me for my entire life. Now, my mother, Susan Wright, had grown up as the daughter of a buggy builder. Her dad built the types of buggies they pulled behind horses at the time. And she is the one who taught Orville and I how to use tools, helped us with all sorts of projects. One I like to remember is a sled. We didn't have one. She said, find out what makes a good sled. Draw a detailed picture of it. Build it exactly like the picture. We did our research. Back then, boys and girls rode on their sleds sitting upright. Orville and I believed that if we built our sled longer, closer to the ground, that the operator could lie down on it so the wind wouldn't blow on them, it would go faster. We took candle wax, melted it, and dripped it onto the runners. The sled that we built, with the help from our mother, went further and faster than any of the other sleds in Dayton. This picture of me at about age 11. I was a very good student. I had dreams of graduating from high school. I wanted to go to Yale University and become a teacher or perhaps a minister like my father. I was also active in sports, football, baseball. I was a good gymnast, and I liked to play ice hockey. I was 18 years old, playing in a particularly rough match. Somebody on the other team suddenly swung or threw their stick, we're not sure which. It hit me in the face, it broke a bunch of bones, cut up my lips, knocked out 5 of my front teeth. And the wounds became infected. And I developed some other physical problems because of that. And suddenly those dreams that I had had of going to college vanished. And I became very sad about that. Today, you would probably say that I was clinically depressed, because for the next 3 years, I just sat around, not really doing anything or helping out. I was fortunate that my family took good care of me, but it really wasn't until my mother became sick that I got out of my depression. My father traveled all the time. My two older brothers had moved away. I was now the oldest one in the household, so taking care of my mother was my responsibility. But my friends, I loved taking care of my mother, and I was no longer depressed. But it took 3 years. My younger brother, Orville, wasn't such a good student, and Orville got into a lot of mischief. When he was in kindergarten, he was supposed to walk to school every day. He came home every day at the same time. After 2 weeks into the school year, my mother went to talk to the teacher to see how I was doing. And she said, "Mrs. Wright, I haven't seen Orville for the last 2 weeks. He had been walking down to his friend's house and playing all day instead of going to school." Orville's talent was in business. He liked to make money. When he was a little boy, he got himself a wagon and pulled it around town, collected scrap metal and old bones and would sell them. He got his friends together and they organized a circus and charged admission. He took little blocks of wood, cut out the letters, and built his own small printing press and would print brochures and pamphlets and things for the businesses around Dayton to advertise on. And then he asked me to help him, and we built an even larger printer and printing press. We started a newspaper called the West Side News, and that was our business for several years. And then there was a turning point. We wondered what else we could do to make a living. Now, about this time in the United States, the Merry Wheel, which you probably call a bicycle, was very popular. Both Orville and I had one, and we would ride around the countryside. We'd use that time to talk and make plans. And just like with the flying toy and the sled and the printing press, we worked on our bicycles. Orville became a successful bicycle racer around Dayton, and our friends started to bring their bikes to us to be repaired. So I convinced Orville in 1892 that we should open up a bicycle repair business. We also started building them from scratch. Here's one of the first ones we sold. We named it a Van Cleve after one of our grandmothers. The business of the bicycle business was going very well, but I was still not satisfied. I felt like that the bicycle business was not really what I was meant to do, what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, but I couldn't come up with what it was. And then Orville got sick. He had typhoid. And just like with my mother, his care was mostly my responsibility. And I would sit by his bedside to keep him company. And when he would sleep, I would read. One day I was reading a magazine article from McClure's magazine about a German scientist named Otto Lilienthal. He had been building gliders, my friends, in Germany. Not little small ones, large enough for him to ride on. Imagine that, being able to soar like a bird. And I began to think about the flight, the little toy that I got when I was 11, and wonder if I could build a flying machine, but not just a glider, a controllable, powered flying machine. What would it take? Well, as Orville was getting better, we started to talk about it. Now, remember, we always did a lot of research. For one reason, because we could read so well. So I wrote a letter to the Smithsonian Institution and asked them for a list of things written up until that time about flying machines. And from that list, I started a reading program. And for the next 3 months, I read everything that had been written about flying machines of importance up until that time. And from all that research, I determined that a successful flying powered machine would have 3 main parts or 3 main systems. Had to have lifting wings, had to have a power plant or some sort of engine to push it through the air. We had to have a way to control it all. Now, the secret of lifting wings, I don't have my paper here, had been known for a long time. And you know that is the Bernoulli effect. That had been known for a while. The automobile had been invented by then. So here's the Bernoulli effect. If I take this curved piece of paper and I blow across the top of it, your expectation is that it's going to go down, right? But here's what happens. It goes up. It's the secret of lift. It's what makes birds fly, what makes airplanes fly, even modern airplanes. Next time you're close to an airplane, look at the top of the wing, and that you'll see that it has a slight curve to it. The power plant, we weren't worried about. We were just going to buy one from the people that made them for automobiles. The control system was different, however. Everyone who had been working on flying machines up until this time, like Otto Lilienthal, like Samuel Langley, who ran the Smithsonian Institution, a gentleman who became a friend of ours named Octave Chanute, who lived in Chicago, even Alexander Graham Bell, who later invented the telephone, were experimenting with flying machines. But none of them had really given any thought and consideration to the control system. And I was convinced that that would be the single most important problem to solve for a successful airplane. And believe it or not, it was my experience with riding bicycles that led me to the solution. Now, if you ride a bicycle, you know that to keep your balance, you have to lean left and lean right. You know that if you go to make a turn, you have to turn the wheel and you have to lean. Well, turning the wheel was a lot like a ship's rudder. Boats had been around for a long time. That's something Orville and I could conceive of pretty easy. So your rudder makes the machine do this. That's called yaw. And if you turn it horizontally, and that's what we called it in the beginning, a horizontal rudder, you can make the machine do this, pitch down and pitch up. But now making it lean was a more complicated problem. But once again, the bicycle led me to the solution. A customer came into the shop one afternoon to buy an inner tube for his bicycle. It came in a box about like this. The ends were cut out. And I was talking to him and I was just sort of fiddling with the box. And I was twisting it back and forth. And I had an idea. Suppose we twisted our wings so that we had more curve on one side than the other side, more lift on this side than on this side. We could make the airplane lean to the left and lean to the right. With the rudder, we could make it yaw left and yaw right. And with the horizontal rudder, I could make it pitch up and pitch down. And I called that the 3-axis control system. And I was the first one to come up with that idea. And now we needed a place to test it. And in all the research I had done, I had determined that an ideal place to test our machine would have about 5 conditions. We had to have steady winds, wide open spaces. The first machines we were going to build would be gliders, so we needed some small hills to push them off of. We needed a soft place to land. I anticipated crashes. And this is something you might not think about. I wanted a place that was private. I thought the machine would work, but if it didn't, I didn't want to be embarrassed. And if it did work, I didn't want a lot of people around who might steal the idea. So I wrote a letter to the United States Weather Bureau, and I asked them for a list of places like that. They sent me a list of over 100 places, and I wrote a letter to each one of them. And I didn't have email, and I didn't even have a typewriter. I wrote a lot of letters. Most of them didn't reply. I got this one letter back from a Mr. William Tate of Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, and I'll read just parts of it. He says, in answering, I would say that you would find here nearly any type of ground you could wish. You could, for instance, get a stretch of sandy land, 1 mile by 5, with a bare hill in the center. Not a tree or a bush anywhere to break the evenness of the wind. He goes on to say that I can reach Kitty Hawk from Elizabeth City by boat, that they have a telegraph, they have daily mails, a healthy climate, but he says I should come in September for the best weather and not wait until November when it gets pretty rough. But now listen to his last paragraph. If you decide to try your machine here and come, I will take pleasure in doing all I can for your convenience and success and pleasure. And I assure you, you will find a hospitable people when you come among us. I decided that I was going to like Mr. Tate and that Kitty Hawk, North Carolina would be where we would test our machine. I didn't even tell him that I was coming. I left on September the 6th of 1900. I took 2 trains, ended up in Newport News, Virginia, where I got on a steamship, sailed around to North Carolina, took another train, but I ended up in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, just 40 miles across the Albemarle Sound from Kitty Hawk. But it took me 3 days to find someone who knew where Kitty Hawk was. It was such a small place. I finally found a resident. His name was Israel Perry, who had a small boat called the Curlicue. Well, it turns out the Curly Q wasn't such a good boat. It leaked quite a bit. The wood was rotting, the sails were torn. It was full of mice, but it was my only ride, so I had to go. We left in the evening. It got dark. We were away and out of sight of land. Worst storm I've ever seen came up. We nearly sank. I was afraid. I thought this first trip to Kitty Hawk was going to be my last trip anywhere. But somehow Captain Perry managed to get the Curly Q into the New River Inlet. We waited for the storm to pass, made repairs, and sailed on across the Albemarle Sound to Kitty Hawk. When we arrived late in the day, it was dark. I had to spend another night on that boat. But the next morning I stepped ashore and I was met by a young boy named Elijah Baum, who showed me where the Tates lived. This is a picture of Mr. and Mrs. Tate, their two little girls, Irene and Paula, and a neighbor. And they were very nice to me. They invited me to stay with them. I asked for a pot of boiled water every morning because I'd seen their well looked like it had dirty water, and I was a little concerned with that. And I started to assemble the first flying machine out in their front yard. It was covered, the wings were covered with a fabric called muslin, tough fabric, maybe like your blue jeans. Mrs. Tate used her sewing machine to help me make the wings. When I left to go back to Dayton for the winter, I left what was left of it, this flyer with the Tates. She took scissors, cut the fabric off, and made dresses for her little girls out of it. A few weeks later, Orville arrived. We moved our camp a few miles from where the Tates lived, put up 2 tents, one for the flyer, one for us to live in. Later on, we built these shacks, but for the first few years, we lived in the tents. And we started to test it first like a kite to make sure that wing warping system worked. Then we put weight on it to see how much it would lift. And finally, I climbed up on it. We pushed it off the sand dune and I crashed. Drug it back up, pushed it off again, and I crashed again. You see, I was having to teach myself to fly. But after a lot of practice and a lot of crashes, I was able to glide this first little machine about 400 feet. We left to go back to Dayton for the winter. We were pretty happy with how things had gone. It just had not lifted as much weight as we had calculated that it should. So to try to address that problem, we thought we'd go back and look at the work that Otto Lilienthal had done. He was the world's foremost expert. And in all of his research, he had determined what he thought would be the ideal curvature, the ideal shape for a wing. We built a second glider in 1901 and went back to Kitty Hawk. The weather was particularly bad that year, but the worst part was the mosquitoes. They were there 24/7. It was very difficult to work and sleep with that many mosquitoes. And on top of that, something was wrong with the flying machine. It didn't lift as much weight as the one the year before had. And I was starting to lose control of it, and the crashes were becoming worse, and I couldn't explain why. And I was very discouraged. The train ride back to Dayton, I told Orville that I didn't think man would fly for 1,000 years, and I was ready to give up. Fortunately for everybody, my sister Sturgeons took over that time and gave me the encouragement I needed to continue, and that's another story. We began to suspect that Otto Lilienthal, the world's foremost expert, we didn't finish high school, but we thought the foremost expert might have made some errors. So we built this wind tunnel. It's a wooden box about 8 feet long, 16 inches on the side, a large fan in one end. And we built several hundred models of wings, mostly out of hacksaw blades, all different shapes and sizes. It took several months of very slow, methodical, even boring work, but we persevered until we thought we had determined what would be the best shape for a wing. We built a third flying machine and went back to Kitty Hawk again in 1902. Up until then, I had been doing all the flying. That year, Orville learned. Here's a picture of me and Mr. Tate pushing Orville off one of the sand dunes. Guess what? The plane worked very well. Otto Lilienthal had been wrong, and we proved it. So now all we needed to do was add one more component. And I know you remember what that was. What is it? A power plant. And we weren't worried about that, were we? We were just going to buy one from the automobile manufacturers. Turns out that was a problem. The automobile manufacturers were not interested in building just one engine for us. So we decided we'd have to make one. Story not many people know. We had hired Charlie Taylor to work in our bike shop. He was a master machinist, very good at what he did. We gave him a crude drawing of what we thought we needed. He took a solid block of aluminum because it's a lightweight metal, and he made a 12 horsepower engine for us, the only one like it that had ever been made. I think Orville and I would have figured out this problem eventually, but if it hadn't have been for Charlie Taylor, it would have taken a much longer time. We took his engine, we went back to Kitty Hawk once again with a fourth flyer in 1903. We started to test the engine, it developed a crack in it. We had to ship it back to Dayton to be repaired. That took several weeks. Started testing again, developed another crack. We persevered, but this time Orville took responsibility for it himself because he was the better mechanic of the two of us. And he took it back himself and rode on the train and rode on the boat all the way back to Dayton. He and Mr. Taylor made repairs, changed some of the metal. He came back again, and that took several weeks. And then the weather was bad for a while, and we couldn't practice. And now we were starting to worry because we had promised our family that we'd be home by Christmas Eve, and we knew that it would take about 7 days to pack up and get back home. All the work was completed by the evening of Saturday, December the 12th. The next day, the flying weather was perfect. We were excited. The machine was ready. We didn't fly that day. Why? It was Sunday, and we promised our father, the bishop, we would not conduct flying experiments on Sunday. But on Monday, December the 14th, we flipped a coin. I won the toss. I would be the first to pilot a powered airplane ever. Now, we were taking off and landing from the sand. Our machine did not have wheels on it. So we built this wooden rail, looks like half of a railroad track. It's about 60 feet long. The idea is the machine would slide along it till it was going fast enough, take off and fly, and then land in the sand like a sled. So I climbed aboard, I checked the controls, I listened to the engine. It all sounded good. I nodded to Orville. I released the rope that was holding it back. It slid down the rail just as planned, picked up speed. I got close to the end. I pulled back on the controls and it shot up into the air. And I shoved the controls off and it slammed into the sand and threw me off and broke the front runner and cut my face up. Wasn't a successful flight, but I really wasn't discouraged. I felt like that if I had done a better job, if I had had more experience, that it might have worked. Took the rest of that day and the next day to make repairs. December the 16th, the weather was really bad. Couldn't try that day. And as I said, now we're getting worried because we promised our family we'd be home by Christmas, and we always kept our promises. During the night, December the 16th, the temperatures dropped down. It was bitterly cold outside. It rained. All the puddles outside were frozen over. There were ice floes in the sound. It wasn't a good day to fly, but like I said, we were pressed against the clock. We put up a flag on the side of our building so that the lifeguards, their house, their place where they worked, was several miles away. They would come over and help us move the machine around. One of them was John Daniels. We gave him our camera, told him to point it at the end of the rail, and that if the machine flew, to press this button. Actually, he had to squeeze a bulb. Mr. Daniels had never seen a camera before, but he thought he could do that. And then Orville and I shook hands, and he climbed aboard because it was his turn. He checked the controls. He listened to the engine. He nodded to me that he was ready. At 10:35 on that morning of December the 17th, he released the rope that was holding it back, and it started sliding down the rail. I was standing out by the right wing, balancing it and running along until I couldn't keep up anymore, and I finally had to let go and step back, and it got about 20 feet from the end of the rail, and it took off. It climbed up to 12 feet above the ground and then came down and almost touched, but it didn't. It went back up and down until finally, after it had traveled 120 feet, stayed in the air for 12 seconds, Orville landed it into the sand at Kitty Hawk. And just like that, that dream that I had had since I was 11 years old came true. Man had flown a powered airplane for the first time in history. I ran over to Mr. Daniels and said, "Did you get the picture?" He said, "Mr. Wright, I was so excited when I saw it flying. I don't know if I pushed the button or not." And he didn't. Took several weeks, but we finally developed it, and sure enough, John Daniels had pressed the button. And I think this is a funny story. A man who had never seen a camera before, Paul, took the most famous picture of an airplane ever taken just as it lifted off for the first time in history. After that, I flew it for a little under 200 feet. Orville's turn, the third attempt, he flew it for a little over 200 feet. And on the fourth attempt that day, my turn once again, I flew it for 852 feet, kept it in the air for 59 seconds. We were feeling pretty good about things about then. We took a break for lunch, but we forgot about the flyer. Big wind came along, started tumbling it down the beach like you dropped your umbrella in the wind. Mr. Daniels, who was a big guy, tried to hold it back, but he couldn't. It drug him along. And by the time we got it stopped, it was broken up pretty badly. We knew it would take a while to repair. We promised our family we'd be home by Christmas, and we had completed why we came there anyway. So for the next few years, we continued to make improvements on our flying machine until we were able to sell it to the French and then to the United States Army. Now, ever since then, people have asked me, how did you and your brother do this thing that so many other people with more education, with more money, with more wealth had been unable to do? A lot of reasons. The most important reason was because Orville and I worked so well together as a team. But there were lots of other things in our lives growing up that didn't seem important at the time that turned out to be very important. The skills that we learned from our father, where he insisted that we learn to read and write so well. When my mother taught us to use tools and then encouraged us and helped us with all sorts of projects. And just in our play, things that didn't seem important at the time turned out to be very important. Look at the flyer. Look at the wooden runners on it. What did we have a lot of experience with that had runners on it like that? Sledding. Notice how Orville is lying down on the machine to cut down on the wind resist. The experience we brought from sledding. And there's a chain drive between the engine and the propellers. The experience we brought from building bicycles. All these things in our lives that didn't seem important at the time turned out to be very important. Some of them were unfortunate. When I was injured at 18, I was going to go to college and become a teacher. Do you think if I had done that I would have taken the time to build the airplane? Probably not. When Orville was sick was when we really started working together and got inspired. When our mother was sick, we had to learn to take care of ourselves and be self-sufficient. Look at Kitty Hall. Do you see a Walmart or a Kmart anywhere there? No, we had to learn to be self-sufficient. All these things in our lives that didn't seem so important at the time turned out to be very important. Now, beyond that, maybe we were just a little bit lucky. I don't know sometimes, but I do know that people still like to talk about flying because flying is exciting and magical and romantic. And it's what I call the spirit of Wilbur Wright. So I've told you quite a bit. I think we got just a few more minutes. Would you like to ask a question about my family or me?
What was the slapping incident or something that occurred one time?
I know what you're talking about. You're talking about the hockey accident. There's a lot of stories around people and the Wright brothers that are real interesting. That's one of them. The guy who hit Wilbur with the stick, his father, Milton Wright, is convinced that it was done on purpose. The guy that hit his name was Paul. He was a neighborhood bully, and he had a dental problem and supposedly was taking some cocaine for medicine. But what they don't say in the story is he became Ohio's worst mass murderer. And he killed his entire family and was hung in 1903. That was the guy who hit Wilbur and changed history. They financed it from their bicycle shop. The whole thing from beginning to end took less than $2,000. They were very frugal. Yes.
Why the French first?
The Europeans were way ahead of the rest of the world in aviation. They knew it was coming. They knew war was coming. And they were all over it from the very beginning. The United States Army just couldn't literally get off the horse. And it took a long time to convince the United States Army. Yes.
On my father's side, his mother's side, I have a relative who was in Texas, Fredericksburg, Texas. And he flew an airplane in 1865. And he powered this. His name was Jacob Rodway. And he was a teacher. Also invented some other things like an ice machine and so on. He used a coil spring to make it work. And when, of course, when the spring unsprung, the plane crashed. It only, I guess the one flight he had went about 100 feet and crashed. And he had some people who backed him. He sold shares in it and so on. As soon as the plane crashed, well, the shareholders, in fact, left, and that was the end of his airplane. But there is some history in that. It's not completely accurate all the way around, but that was it.
And I haven't heard that guy's name in particular. The name that usually comes up is Gustav Whitehead, and who lived in Connecticut. This other guy named Anders from France. And I think that when you really get down and look at it, you'll find out that those airplanes were not really controllable, and they were not sustainable. And that's the difference between the Wright brothers and everybody else, I think. I'd be interested to hear more about him. John.
So just kind of a couple things. Was it French stand that took the model and developed it into a war aircraft, fighting the war, and about how long did that take? Was it the French first?
What happened was that 1903, the Wright brothers decided that they were way ahead of everybody. For the next 2 years, they made improvements. They had a workable, flyable, practical machine in 1905. They decided that everybody else was at least 5 years behind them. They put it up, wouldn't show anybody until they had a contract. As soon as Wilbur went to France and started flying around, everybody went, oh my God, that's how it's done. And right away, everybody started stealing the idea. There were 12 years worth of patent battles over that. Glenn Curtis was foremost in that bunch. But once people saw it, everybody started building airplanes.
And when so they did it for a couple of years, and then they brought it back out, and they land the whole wheels and so.
They didn't have wheels, not at first. They didn't get wheels too much later.
Talk about their finances after, was it sell out or sell? And then you say everybody was stealing their ideas and everything, but how well off did this, or did it?
They made a lot of money, but they were really suspicious, and I think that held them back a little bit. They were a little suspicious in getting their patent, but there were 12 lawsuits, with the exception of one in Europe. They won every one of them, but ultimately lost the battle because everybody started building airplanes. I said, particularly Glenn Curtis really took off with it, but they made a lot of money by selling a package to the French, for example. It says, we'll give you 2 workable airplanes. We'll teach 10 guys to fly. That's how they made their money. I think we got to go. Thank you very much.
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Wilbur, for joining us today, and thank you, Paul, for bringing it to us. What an amazing story of inspiration, discipline, stick-to-itiveness, family influence. I mean, what a fantastic story. Thank you for sharing it with us. Really do appreciate it. Now, I should have brought my piece of paper. I stole yours, and it didn't bring back mine. Because next week, we don't have a meeting here. Don't come to McGregor Downs. We've got our installation banquet I mentioned earlier over at Prestonwood starting at 6. Please, RSVP. We've got a great evening in store and a wonderful buffet dinner. We'll be in the Oak Room. So if you're familiar with Prestonwood, sort of the old club is to the right side, and we'll be in their traditional restaurant with a big fireplace, not in the banquet hall. Okay. In 2 weeks, don't come to McGregor Downs because we don't have there'll be no program or meeting on Tuesday, July 5th in observation of the Independence Day holiday. So for the next 2 weeks on Tuesday noon, your time is your own. In the meantime, though, that gives me an opportunity to recognize a lot of people that have events coming up over the next couple of weeks. The first that I need to recognize is Darren Gay, who had a birthday last week that I left off the list. Sorry, Darren. Happy birthday. Today, John Collins celebrates a birthday. Joe Sturdivant on Thursday. Mark Lawson on Friday, John Ogle, July 10th, and Bob Moore, July 11th. So we've got a number of birthdays coming up over the next couple of weeks. We've got some club anniversaries to celebrate. On the 1st of July, Mrs. Blair Hatcher and Mrs. Kathy Mannix will be celebrating 15 years as honorary members of our club. So please pass along our thanks and congratulations to them. Also on July 1st, Howard Johnson and Tom Brooks will be celebrating 36 years as members of the Cary Rotary Club. Tom has been here for every one of those meetings in the last 36 years worth of meetings. Perfect. Look, I gave away some of the story for next week. But thank you, Tom. Congratulations. Happy anniversary today to Ron and Prudence Fitzsimmons. Ron, happy anniversary to you. Mary and Tom Marr, June 28th. Congratulations. Blair and Rita Hatcher will also have an anniversary on the 28th. Reggie and Lisa Scales on July 8th. And Ernie and Joyce Faulkner also on July 8th. So we've got lots of celebrating to do between now and the next time that we're all together in this location. So as we wrap up today, I want to thank, I'm sorry, Paul.
Go ahead.
I want to thank Scott Schneider for stepping in as our greeter. Thank you, sir. Paul Wazokevich for introducing all of our guests, making them feel welcome. Beth, thank you very much for joining us today. Paul, thanks for introducing Paul. And Paul, thanks again for bringing Wilbur with you. Thanks, Aiden, for helping to transition. And so we come to the close of our meeting, almost close of our meeting. Go ahead, Paul.
I just wanted, since this is your official last meeting, I want to thank you, and I want the club, if they would, I know next week you're going to be officially recognized, but I enjoyed having you as my president, and I would like to thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everyone. The last year has been one of the great joys of my life. And so it's a time I will deeply treasure. And we'll have a chance to talk some more about that one-on-one. Might even have a cold beverage along the way. But it's been fantastic to be a part of this club and to have all of the support that you all have brought. So with that, can I ask Mr. Tim Mannix to lead us out on the four-way test?
Of the things we think, say, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
We are adjourned.